Hey,
Hi,
I'm Alex,
I'm Val.
and we are going to talk about Sopranos.
We are.
Season 6A, Episode 2, Join the Club. We're back from our break, getting back and adjusted into Soprano world.
Mm-hmm.
And it begins one of my favorite parts of the whole show, this whole Kevin Finnerty
Me too.
sideline. It's really amazing. I'm a big fan.
Yeah, I know. I'm a big fan of these first two episodes back to back, actually, as well.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of form, it's really fascinating to think about having this huge break, coming back to season 6, starting off with Tony being shot in the first episode is such an unexpected twist to happen so early. I can't, even since The Sopranos, with the way that they revolutionized TV and arcs throughout seasons, I can't really think of many shows that have done something like that, if any. I can't think of anything.
So bold.
And then to take that and then immediately go into this kind of surrealist place that's mixed with the immediate kind of family reaction in the hospital is really cool.
Yeah.
Unexpected, daring, ambitious, commenting on all the themes that they've been building. Interesting to bring it into the kind of tail end of the show in general. I think introduces some larger questions of who Tony Soprano really is.
Yeah.
It's a way to kind of investigate his psyche, but outside of dream logic, outside of psychology, in this kind of near-death place that they've looked at before with Christopher and others. Mm-hmm. But I just love it. I think it's great.
Me too. Yeah, it really is this kind of like you said, this kind of investigation into who Tony is, and maybe by the end of this episode, like someone he's choosing to be at that point too. Like, I mean, we'll talk about Kevin Finnerty, but he makes a choice at the end of this episode to not pick up the phone to call his family.
Right. A lack of connection, a lack of human connection.
Yeah, and
he is kind of isolated. He is
instead kind of looks to this beacon.
Right. Contemplating whatever that is.
Yeah. So, I don't know. Anyways, I just think it's like a terrific episode. Mm-hmm. I didn't even really realize it was a controversial episode because I like it so much. But if you don't like it,
well, I think...
email us and let us know why.
Well, I think also a lot of controversy happened at the time that the show was coming out because it was so unexpected. I think it's one of these things that has aged well, whereas a lot of shows age poorly. I think it's probably remembered better than it was maybe received in the moment. Because people don't know what to make of something like that. And I can totally understand that. But I really do love this world that they create around Kevin Finnerty. And I like the way that Kevin Finnerty is somewhat of a doppelganger to Tony. They have this similar composure. He's kind of introduced as this character who is next to him at the bar, similar size, also
they
ordered a grouper sandwich.
They order the same food.
He's to the point where he's actually mistaken by the monks. And Kevin Finnerty, there's all these kind of like commonalities between them that make us wonder, especially in lieu of the diagnosis of Alzheimer's, is Kevin Finnerty even a different person? And the question that I ask too is, as we go through this kind of exploration of this world, Anthony Soprano talks about how he was a patio furniture salesman and has moved into defense, and talks about this with this group at the bar. And so for me, in reference to the way that Tony's always talked about, well, I could have been a patio furniture salesman, or I wanted to be a patio furniture salesman, or what if I was a patio furniture salesman? There's also this doppelganger of the two Tonys of, well, what if he was not who he is
right
now,
well, that's
who
what
we've come to know?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Like, is the Anthony Soprano in those scenes our Anthony Soprano?
Well, yes and no for me.
Yeah.
He is. For me, he is. But there's also this kind of what if question. There's this idea of what if he wasn't in the mob? Who would he be?
But it's just, but it is this interesting choice, right? Like, it's almost like there's these multi-layers, right? So it's like Tony Soprano's coma, right? Our Tony Soprano's coma, where he's a different Anthony Soprano who then has to take on the identity of someone entirely different.
Right.
Like, and so there's kind of these like three layers.
There's a lot of layers, yeah.
There's a lot of layers, but it's just like it's an interest like it's just it's a very purposeful choice, obviously, to make it that way. And so, like, who is that, like, intermediary Anthony Soprano?
Well,
like,
that's an
in between
question.
our Tony Soprano and Kevin Finnerty.
Yeah.
Like, who is that guy?
Right. And does he become Kevin Finnerty by the end? Because maybe does the three become two? Because there is a kind of an evolution of dream or death world Anthony Soprano. Because for me, he starts off as this kind of idealized character. He's proper. He's going to this defense convention. He's calling his wife.
He doesn't have an accent. I
yeah,
love hearing James Gandolfini.
He's more proper.
Yeah.
But he's calling his family. He has this, kind of like jokey, his kids are all talking in unison and he laughs because it's funny. He starts off, that's a very different person than who Tony Soprano is. But what's amazing is that even though not that much time actually happens in that world in this episode, I always kind of recall it being more than it actually is.
Well,
when
it's
I go
kind
back
of
to watch
nebulous.
it.
Like, there's day and there's night and there's...
But I just mean if you were actually to add up the screen time, it's not as much as you might think.
Yeah.
And what's really interesting
I thought it was more also. I realized this time.
I always think that, yeah. And the thing that I love is that even in that small amount of time throughout the course of this episode, there's an evolution of that character, of Anthony Soprano. Because he starts off as this kind of Leave It to Beaver dad kind of type, and then there's this evolution of steps where he kind of becomes a worse and worse person, where it's interesting because that kind of connects him to the Anthony Soprano that we know. He's with this woman, they're kind of making out. She actually says, like, she recognizes that he wouldn't do something, I guess, but that's coming from her. It seems like he actually would in this moment.
Then he commits fraud.
He commits fraud. He pays on the card. That's an interesting scene because he's kind of being judged by Morgan, this guy at the Omni Hotel. This guy who kind of seems to be aware in a way, or maybe that's just us reading too much into it, but I think that there is an intention of creating a character behind the counter who is aware that he is he's passing this threshold of negative action. And he's kind of judging him. And as soon as he does put down that card of Kevin Finnerty's and commit fraud, those monks kind of just appear. So there's something there, I think, for me, of that Tony Soprano kind of devolving and being judged for it. And then as we continue, I'm kind of left with the question, well, who is this Anthony Soprano? And if he is an alternate to the Anthony Soprano that we know, is he really a good guy? Because he's pretty quickly devolving into a lot of the same actions that the Tony Soprano that we know gets involved in. So even if he had been a patio furniture salesman and he had been more proper and he had a different accent and a different family, would he be a good person? Because I think this show is constantly concerned with, is Tony Soprano a good person? Are these people good people? And I think you have to kind of ask yourself the question, well, maybe not. Maybe there's something there beyond just the tie and the magnetism of the mob family, because that's kind of the easy excuse for himself. And it's true, he was born into this family, but I think there's maybe more than that. There's something there that is him, that is an issue.
Yeah. I don't know. It's a hard question. I think like there's kind of like multiple acts within that storyline as well. And I think like that moment where he uses the credit card does definitely mark like a shift.
Yeah.
But then there's another shift when he falls down the stairs.
Right.
And ends up in the hospital.
Yeah.
As Kevin Finnerty / our other Tony Soprano, when our own Tony Soprano is in the hospital.
It's almost like its own little 3-act.
Yeah. There's
story.
there's just these, because there's these shifts during those times. Like before before that happens, he's still a little bit worried about it being fraud, right? Like he's on the phone with his wife. He's like, it's fraud and whatever. But then by the time he's in the hospital, he's like, oh, well, you used his insurance card.
Right.
Like, what do you think about that?
Yeah.
Like, he's just kind of like,
right.
What?
Accepting
you know?
it. Yeah.
So it's interesting. I think like the big question for me about that world, or about that like in that internal state of Tony or whatever it might be, is kind of the question that is said a few times in the episode, which is like, who am I and where am I going?
Yeah.
So like, who are these characters and what's their kind of like ultimate destination?
Right.
Also, I guess, where are we, right? So maybe we'll talk about where this takes place too. But I think
Costa Mesa.
Well, yeah. Yeah. Right.
Oh.
That's easy. Yeah. Takes place in Costa Mesa.
Yeah, by the light beacon.
Yeah.
Duh.
Obviously. Because there's multiple references to this kind of being a strange place, obviously, right? So even like his wife saying to him, "You're off in your own little world." That he never wanted to go to this conference. He kind of just like ended up here in some ways too, right? Like we see that Tony Soprano, that Anthony Soprano as he calls himself, waking up on a bed. It's a similar angle to the, we see Tony when he gets shot from directly above, but we also we open this episode with also a shot from directly above, right? With him lying on the bed.
On his own.
On his own.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's some funny lines like when he's at the bar, he's saying, "What's it like here in Costa Mesa?" And the bartender says, "Round here, it's dead."
Right.
And I think like definitely a read of this episode, right, is that
I'm not internet forums dedicated to that line.
Is there?
I think so.
Or are there rather? I think it's like, I think you can definitely read it. I think you can definitely read this episode as some kind of like purgatory, hell type
Probably
of
not
environment.
heaven.
Probably not. Yeah, like it's unlikely that it is. But it is also kind of like, I don't know, like his grappling with the afterlife is kind of like just like being able to see some possibilities, I think, right? So like throughout the episode, like we have weird religious films being shown. We have those Buddhist
Are
monks.
sin, disease, and death real?
Yeah.
And then this image of a cross.
Yeah. We have characters in the real world, like we don't have them referencing religion all that much, but of course we have like Carmela with her, crucifix necklace, and
also referencing
shown.
The pilot episode where she tells Tony that he's going to go to hell. So dealing with that, and also for her rationalizing that he won't go to hell because he cares about his friends and is a good father.
Yeah.
And yet we have to kind of question, well, does he really care about his friends? Do his friends really care about him based on the actions in this episode? And is he really a good father? Because AJ is a disaster in this episode, and debatably Meadow too.
Yeah.
Depending on who you talk to.
We'll talk about that maybe in a bit.
We'll talk to Val about that, see what she thinks.
Yeah. Well, let's go to real Tony after, if that's okay.
That's great.
Because the other line that for me was pretty important in this episode, or not even the line, it's kind of just like the outcome after he falls down the stairs, right? So we have him, stairs with fire at the top of them, as we see in that picture, and it's interesting when you think about like descent, right? Like he's going down the stairs, he's falling down the stairs. If you think about like Dante's Inferno or something like that, where there's these like layers of hell or death or whatever it might be, right? Like he's actually, when he does fall down, he is kind of like going down. He's going deeper, right?
Yeah. Interesting, yeah.
But the fact that there's this like kind of like threat of Alzheimer's at the end, and him saying, "I'm not going to know myself soon," and then saying, like, "I'm lost." I think that's actually the last line we hear that Tony Soprano / Kevin Finnerty say.
Yeah.
Because then the last scene we have with him is silent. We don't have him say anything.
Right. Well, and we also have, like, the contemplation of connecting with his family and choosing not to. So choosing not to
but that's all
speak.
Silent, right?
Right,
So,
no,
like,
exactly.
yeah.
But choosing silence.
Yeah.
Like making that conscious choice to be alone and to contemplate rather than to talk to these people around him.
But I think it's like, I'm not going to know myself soon. I'm lost. This, like, kind of, like, I don't know, Alzheimer's as some kind of, like, escape from needing to figure yourself out, right? Like, I think, like, you know, like, he doesn't, if he's not going to know himself soon, then, like, why is he going to bother trying to figure out who Kevin Finnerty is, / who he is, / get out of this kind of, like, this place he's in, right? Like, it's kind of just, like, anyways, I don't know. I still have to kind of think through a little more. But, yeah, the other part that's, like, there's a repeating symbol, right, of these lights and what sounds like a helicopter, right? Like, and so, like, we can think, like, it kind of reminds us of, you know, when Christopher was shot, right? Like, he kind of had those glimmers of light throughout his dreams. But it also, like, they're also looking for someone, right? Like that's what the female character, what's her name?
Which female character?
The one who he meets at the bar.
Oh, female character at bar.
Yeah. She's like, they're looking for a perp. And, you know, anyways, I just think, like, they're looking for someone. Right? And so, like, you could say, like, maybe, like, if someone actually were, like, in a coma state, right? Like, that they might be seeing or hearing some of the things that are going on outside, which might sound like machines and have lights flashing on you. But so I think, like, yeah, it's just these kind of, like, glimpses or glimmers to the outside.
Right.
But we also know that he's not, like, there's this, like, they're like, you know, there's a couple references to, like, talk to him, he can hear you or whatever, and then also, like, play him some of his favorite music. And we know that our Kevin Finnerty, Anthony Soprano, isn't hearing the music, right? We never see, like, anything kind of, like, connect between them. So.
Yeah. It's interesting to see the people around Tony and his family responding to this tragedy for them, because I think it's kind of a window into who these other people are also. I think Carmela probably shows the most empathy and kind of, like, true searching from things, because I feel like a lot of the other characters are rather self-absorbed throughout everything, and that people are not really responding in a way that shows that they care that much about Tony. And I think that it's indicative of this entire world of The Sopranos, of kind of a culture of selfishness and being self-absorbed. Janice kind of bursting into the room, seeking attention. Even Meadow, and I think you'll love this, you know, but her comments to the doctor about kind of like, or even Carmela's comments to the doctor in this moment of her husband dying, basically in a coma, making him know that she went to, you know, intern at an ICU, and Meadows saying, or law, I'm contemplating law. Like, there's just this kind of, like, unnecessary bringing back of attention to oneself that happens a lot for a lot of characters. It's also like Vito on the sports book and Roseville, I think. My Jersey town pronunciation isn't great. But Syl actually explicitly says, not about yourself. Like, don't make this about yourself, which I think is something that kind of ties together these characters, because obviously the main character that we're dealing with that for in this episode is AJ, who is clearly not engaging with the family, not helping out, doing his own thing, and then kind of evolves to this place where, you know, we see him, and Carmela actually thinks that he is engaging in a kind of beneficial way with his dad, but he's actually contradicting himself from just before, talking about hybrid cars, talking about how he wants a Mustang, and just talking about something that he wants with his dad in a coma. So there's no connection there to what Tony is going through. It's all about AJ and these material things and what he wants. And then even when he comes out and his mom is impressed by that connection that they supposedly had, he flips that around and turns it into a way of best presenting this information that he knows is harmful to himself, because he knows that he can't get in as much trouble for it because he's flunked out, but it's not a time to deal with it. And also he's kind of gained some brownie points from dealing with this. So I just feel like there's a lot of characters that are self-absorbed, and there's a bit of a facade. There's a bit of kind of just this, like, shallow veneer of caring about Tony.
Yeah, but at the same time, like, I'm not, like, on Team AJ or anything like that, but he's the only, like, everyone's like, you know, Carmela says to him, like, that means so much to your father, right? Like, and he's like, who knows what it means?
Right.
Right? Like, he's not saying anything. Like, I feel like AJ's kind of like, he's dealing, like, we know that AJ has a different way of dealing with things, right? We almost get him to talk about his philosophy class, but he gets cut off. But he has a different way of looking at the world than other characters do.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like it's definitely more nihilistic. It's more like, who cares?
Yeah.
But he also has this like very deep emotional moment where he's like, I'm going to kill Junior.
Right. Well, I think that's kind of where his evolution leads him to. But I think that's interesting because that's bringing him more to who his father is. Mm-hmm. This kind of like petty revenge and this murderous instinct.
Is it petty? Or like, would Tony think it was petty? Probably not.
Tony would not want AJ to be murdering Junior on his behalf.
Tony would not want AJ to be murdering Junior, but like...
Nor could he. But AJ, even though he's not really capable of being a part of that world, he is being pushed into it by his failures outside of it.
What do you mean?
Well, AJ isn't really functioning in the real world. Mm-hmm. He's not functioning in university. He wasn't functioning in any work environment. He can't really do anything. And so through the nature of that and the nature of who his dad is and the fact that he's just been shot, it's actually pushing AJ into kind of a role of crime. And a role of violence, which is what his dad always didn't want for him. And AJ wouldn't be able to fully engage in that world in the way his dad does because he doesn't have the temperament or the background to do it. But it's ironic that it's still bringing him there. Mm-hmm. And it's actually scary because he wouldn't be able to, the thought of AJ actually acting on that impulse clearly would not lead anywhere that is good.
No. I just think, like, it's in some ways, like, closest to what Tony would want people to react. I don't know.
I don't know about that.
I don't know.
I don't think so. I don't think Tony would want revenge on him for Junior. I mean, I think Junior is going senile.
You think?
I mean, he is.
Yeah.
But I think that Tony can, to some degree, recognize that. I don't think that he would want revenge on somebody who's going senile. I actually don't think that plays into his code.
But I think that's the
family.
Like, that's the interesting part with the Alzheimer's thing at the end of the episode with Kevin Finnerty in the hospital. Is like, there is this, like, you don't have to, like, I forget how he puts it. Like, you smurf around for something. He says something about Smurfs. You're a Smurf? I don't know.
You're a Smurf.
And there is this, like, element where, like, Junior isn't responsible for the things. Junior doesn't have to, like, question himself and, like, who he is and why he does the things he's doing and where he's going. He's, like, lost that capability.
Right. Right. That's interesting.
And I think Tony in some ways is kind of, like, jealous of that, right? Because, like, Tony does have to. He doesn't want to, but Tony does grapple with these questions of who is he, where is he going, and
join the club.
Yeah,
that's
right?
what's said to him, yeah.
And Junior's a character who doesn't have to do that.
Right.
You know?
I also think it's interesting that regardless of who Tony is, he's always dealing with that question. He's been dealing with that throughout the entire course of the show. And now we see this alternate Tony who's still dealing with it. He's talking to these people who say that they're impressed being around this guy who's grabbed brass rings 12 quarters in a row. And that's ultimately meaningless too, because Tony responds by saying, "Where am I going?" That doesn't fulfill him either. So whether Tony is in the mob or he has this alternate life.
And he says, there's always a faster gun.
Right. There's always a faster gun. So, I mean, Tony is constantly looking for meaning, as everybody is.
Yeah.
As Carmela is, as every character in the show and every person in life.
Yeah. Like I said, except kind of if you have, like Junior does, this, like, disconnect between, you know, like, your body and kind of your actions even.
Yeah.
With any kind of, like, element of your identity. I don't know. And then, I don't know. I think there's this thing also about, you know, like, whoever, Anthony, Kevin Finnerty, Tony, kind of like choosing these different identity, like having this option of different identities that he can choose whenever it kind of suits him, right? Like he has this option to be Kevin Finnerty and he takes it.
Right.
Characters in real life don't have that option. Well, I mean, we all like show.
Maybe you're at a bar and you pick up the wrong briefcase.
Yeah, we show different pieces of our identities in different realms, right? And Tony definitely does this, right? Like Carmela even talks about that when she's talking to him, saying like, you know, you're a good father, you care about your friends, right? Like what we said earlier, like she's trying to like, you know, capture this one part of his identity or like skew this one part of his identity when it suits her. But in this dream sequence, like there are these options of having these kind of like distinct identities. And I think that is something that Tony does grapple with, right? Like who he is as a person. Like, is it closer to, you know, like his mob family identity or his home family identity or whatever.
Right.
Or this, like, we also get a flash into, you know, it's interesting that Carmela chooses this time when Tony's in a coma to talk about this very early part of their relationship where they go to somewhere with Artie and Charmaine. And she's talking about like Tony's hair and stuff like that. Like, so we see this like other, like maybe pre-patio furniture salesman Tony at this kind of like carefree time.
It was interesting too when they talk about Charmaine being thrown around by the waves and she's kind of laughing about it. It's kind of another example for me of like laughing at violence. It's kind of like Tony in therapy laughing about the misfortune that he had from his parents.
Yeah, but they talk about like she even has this line. She's like, that woman around water or whatever, which is like a very strange. Like,
she says a couple of weird things in that.
She does. She does say some really weird things, like you used to get me so hot down there.
Thanks, David Chase, for writing that.
I was thinking, I was like, I don't know, like hot and down there, hell, I don't know. I was trying.
I don't think that's what it was.
Shoot.
Maybe it was.
Yeah, that's what she was talking about, right? Yeah.
Deep symbolism.
I don't know. Yeah, that was very strange. I can't quite imagine Carmela saying that.
Right.
But we also see her kind of like, you know, in the shower, like this talk of water, like when she was talking about Charmaine in the water, and then we see her not that long after, like in the shower with water pouring over her.
Yeah.
And we know, like, you know, any high school or middle school level symbolism,
right?
You know, can think about fire and water and think about, you know, the religious aspects of water. But I think, you know, I think this imagery is just kind of being like thrown at us, and I don't really think that it's like a puzzle necessarily to solve or like that there's any kind of answer to this episode. But I think like what Chase is doing is like just throwing all this imagery at us and kind of letting us sit with it and see where our
I really think like the point is never to solve a puzzle with David Chase or any director that creates these kind of abstract worlds. It's just not.
No.
It's just not the purpose, and it's very enticing to grab onto that, and that's kind of like the human thing to do. But I think that's ultimately what David Chase is constantly playing with in this show. He's trying to hand you things. And I just want to thank him because the last movie we watched was Inland Empire, and I used to think that this was a very cryptic series of episodes in Kevin Finnerty land, but it's pretty straightforward compared to that movie. So thank you, David Chase, for not giving us rooms full of bunnies. Bunny people.
For sure.
Polish bunny people.
What else?
I just thought
I just had some, just to, you know, continue with my symbolism of hell.
Yeah.
There's of course the Costa Mesa
fire in the TV.
Yeah. As well as the fire, like I mentioned, on the sign for the stairwell when he takes the stairwell down. I thought it was kind of funny when he gets like what looks like heartburn before he sees the lights or the helicopters. You know,
Interesting.
burning fire.
Yeah. Also, just the lights throughout the episode.
lights.
The light of the beacon, these blinding lights
Yeah.
that come
I
through.
wanna come
Focus
back
of
to
light
the
coming
beacon
through
also.
windows.
Um,
Well, we have more time to come back to the beacon in
Yeah.
future episodes.
That's true. There's also kind of this like nebulous like laughter in the background sometimes. Like when he's at the bar, there's often this kind of like laughing going on. Kind of cackling. Like it's interesting. Interesting laughter. We have the Omni Hotel, right? So he's at these 2 different hotels. That's another part of it too. That's like he leaves this one hotel and checks out, but then he wants to get back in and he can't.
Right.
Right. So that's why I feel like it is this kind of like descent, right? Like it's
Right.
kind of like this downwards trajectory. But this hotel where he has this Morgan at the desk that
Yeah.
we were talking about is the Omni Hotel.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I just feel like it's, you know, like there's ties to like omnipresence and stuff
Right.
like that, right? Like it's kind of this like like all seeing,
Omnipotency.
like all seeing thing, where things are like kind of clear, I guess. There was one other. Oh, yeah, you used to get me so hot down there. I underlined hot.
It's an important part
Yeah.
of the episode.
And then but then like there's also like the lights shining on different things like you mentioned. And the one that I think is really interesting is the light over the phone at the end. And we've talked about phones before.
All the time.
All the time.
Black phones in particular.
Especially black phones. And I thought that was really interesting. And like, again, think about the beacon, right? To think about like what it means to kind of like shed light on it. And same with those helicopter lights, right? Like the lights that are kind of like spotlighting things. That there's, you know, and the rest of the room is kind of dark around it, right? So it's kind of like it's highlighting this thing that could bring you out of the place where you are, right? Like connecting with his family could like bring him out of this kind of dark place of just having fallen down the stairs and, you know, discover that he might have Alzheimer's, right? But it won't. That beacon that's like way far beyond the hotel. I guess he sees it from both hotel rooms, right?
Yeah. Seems to be seen everywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't think he sees it from anywhere but his hotel room windows, but
yeah. And I mean that light, I mean it is expanded in future episodes that are just about to come up, but there is kind of that aspect of going towards the light too. That's reflected in him looking up and seeing these lights, these helicopter spotlights, the beacon light, looking forward and actually it being somewhat of a portal to the actual world of seeing the doctor through it. It's interesting. Yeah. Do you have more on that?
No, I just wanted to say them before I moved on to anything else.
Yeah. I just thought the other characters were really interesting, like the relationship to Tony and even the relationship to Death around Eugene in this episode, which is such a footnote, even though Tony
we basically forgot that last episode Eugene died.
Basically forgets, right? Basically irrelevant, and it's basically irrelevant for these characters. They don't really care that much, and they're there in the background talking about
themselves,
business,
and Tony.
And that's kind of what I was trying to get at before, is this idea of all these characters just acting in their own interest, talking about themselves and being uninterested in the misfortunes of others. So it was interesting too, still saying maybe he was suffering from an inoperable cancer or something regarding Eugene. And in some ways he was, but the inoperable cancer is just his relationship to the mob.
Yeah.
It's Tony, or just this lifestyle or that family that he couldn't escape from, because that was this cancer that he couldn't separate himself from. Also, just the jockeying of all the characters, like Chris stealing Polly's idea for the stereo, sending the stereo to the room. Yeah. You know, saying it's a bad idea, but then doing it. Everybody is acting in ways, again, that's just in their own best interest. It's not really about Tony. So giving gifts in a way where it's not about giving a gift to somebody, it's about doing something that benefits yourself.
Yeah. It's also like, different people's reactions, right? Or like drawing attention to themselves. Like the whole time we see Janice in this episode, she's like, well, there's that one scene where she's sitting with her child, whatever, Nika or whatever.
Okay, I guess, right. I don't even know. Who is that?
Her child with Bobby. I don't know.
Right, yeah. She's there, right.
But the other scenes, she's like sobbing and making a scene, right? And Carmela is actually having to like comfort her
right
when she comes into the room and stuff.
Yeah. There's some interesting camera work on characters. There was some spin shots that we've seen with Tony going back as far as college, but you kind of employ it in different ways. There's this spin around AJ that actually is kind of not complete and actually stops behind him when we see him in the hospital on his head, just kind of from behind. But we see complete 360 spins around Carmela, and we've seen those spins kind of reflecting depth of characters, multiple sides, the two faces, the different sides that maybe we're about to be introduced to. But we don't fully see it for AJ. Syl actually kind of gets a half spin too when he's talking to all those people at Eugene Pontecorvo's funeral. It kind of is spinning around him, and we could almost expect that we would see the other side of his face. It doesn't really quite get there, but they do use that shot on different characters, and they do complete the arc of the camera in different ways. Carmela is kind of one of the only ones, though, who gets like this full circle around her, kind of indicating depth.
Right. Yeah. Then there's Meadow. I mean, she reads a poem.
It's beautiful.
And that's so like going back to like, like AJ, like, I don't know, people like being critical of AJ for talking about cars with Tony when he's in there. Like, who cares what he's talking about, right? Like, it's kind of like what are you supposed to talk about, right?
Yeah, that's true.
Versus,
what are you supposed to talk about?
Like kind of like getting this kind of contrived, like a poem. Like Tony wouldn't want a poem.
Right.
He'd probably rather talk about cars.
Probably. And you have a point, but
like,
AJ is also talking about cars because he wants them to buy him a car, and that's what it's about.
I don't know. I mean, I guess so. I guess that would be. I mean, but like, they bought Meadow her car too. Like,
right.
It's
not really the place for it. It's not a great indicator of character.
Like, if it's something he's like passionate about, I don't know. I don't really like fault AJ too much for it. I like the scene about AJ with Rosalie and Carmela.
Yeah.
Where, Rosalie is kind of trying to give advice and Carmela's like,
you never did anything.
Your son's dead. You didn't,
Yeah.
And she like really calls it out, right? Like he's just being a spoiled brat and he doesn't care.
Yeah.
Right? He was never really taught to care. Or whatever. It's like in his genetics. But like, I don't know. I really hate when people talk about Meadow and AJ as being these like two polar opposites, where like Meadow's this like wonderful child and AJ's this shitty child, because like I think Meadow's pretty shitty.
It's different.
Like
it's
well, like
she's
the part
become a different person, but it's still very problematic.
Yeah, like the part where she's on the phone with Finn, right? Who's like clearly going through something with his dental school or whatever, and she's like, I don't know, she's like railing on him for like paying full fare economy, and like also her mom's being interrogated by the FBI at this time, and she's like pouring vodka and then talking to Finn on the phone about and criticizing him for like also needing something in that time. I don't know.
Yeah, there's definitely kind of like an entitled personality that comes through with Meadow that is kind of exacerbated in the seasons where she gets closer and closer to the family. And I think that it kind of develops in a way where we see her more and more reliant on the money that Tony has made through this life, and that it kind of weaves her into all of the negative actions more than at times of the show where she's kind of trying to extricate herself from it. I found some irony in Satrial seeing that they accept food stamps.
Oh, really? I didn't see that.
I like that hypocrisy that they could rail on social programs and yet accept food stamps for their food there. Like that. Small detail.
Well, they make money off of that.
Yeah, they make money.
Yeah.
Exactly. They're not going to say no.
They could scam. They could have a scam running.
Maybe
with
they
food
do.
Stamps.
Maybe they do.
They probably do.
But especially with the FBI agents there and them talking to Harris and seeing that as Chris is kind of like walking into the building, there's something for me there that ties them to the institution that maybe they wouldn't recognize, that like they rail on the institution and they won't give these people anything and they're the enemy, and yet they're accepting this government program that they are so critical of with this kind of simplistic conservative value system. I liked it. Small detail.
Cool.
But I feel like small details are very intentional in this show.
I think they are.
They are. So, we're happy to be back. And it's fun to talk about Sopranos.
It is.
And get in touch if you have anything you want to say to us.
Yeah.
Good or bad. If we're mispronouncing any words or towns in New Jersey, we should know.
Yeah, and also, like, I don't know, like we said, like, for those of you who haven't seen the season before, the things that are brought up in this episode really do continue throughout this season. And so this is kind of just like a first taste of them.
Yeah.
We don't want to give any spoilers.
No spoilers.
So.
But thank you for listening.
Yeah.
We'll be back soon.
Yep.
See you then.